In a previous video, we talked about how to drink whiskey, and we kind of divided it into two camps. There was appreciating whiskey and enjoying whiskey. Today, I want to get deeper into the appreciation side of whiskey and how to extract more information out of the whiskey. And I've got a few whiskey hacks too, some diagrams that will really help you pull out those flavors from the whiskey that you've spent good money on. You're going to learn how to taste whiskey like a pro. So grab your dram, grab a seat, and let's So welcome to the first fill. I'm Phil and I'm going to fill you in about whiskey. So the first thing about getting to taste a whiskey is, well, you got to pour the whiskey. You can't just leave it in the bottle. You can't really taste it just in the bottle. So pour it in. Look at that. Delicious. So first of all, you just want to swirl the glass and you want to look for the streaks of liquid that are coming down the side of the glass. And this indicates to you the mouthfeel. The thicker the legs, the more it will hint what the mouthfeel might be like, where it's full-bodied or medium-bodied or light-bodied. And then the next part is you want to nose the whiskey. Now, when you first get into whiskey, you'd be like, well, what does that mean, nosing your whiskey? Now, nose is just a fancy way of saying smelling, It's just a better way of saying, you want to do a good smell of your old smelly whiskey. But you don't really want to, you can say that if you want, but yeah. So people say nose, they say it in wine as well. Nose, it's just fancy, don't have to. You can say a good sniff, on the sniff. But most people don't, they say nose. And the next bit is the glass shape. So there's lots of different glasses. Let me grab a few. This is one sort of in between, tumbler, and it goes a bit narrow. What else we got? Brandy glasses. Your glass type actually does really influence how much flavor and how much smell you're going to get out of the whiskey. At the moment, I'm using the Glencairn, and that's the one most sort of whiskey pros use, or whiskey experts, for really getting as much aromas out of the whiskey as possible, because it's got the wide bottom and narrow top, so it concentrates it all up. And you can see a little bit more about this in my other video again, how to drink whiskey. Now, you've got to be careful. Just make sure if it's a cask strength whiskey and you're just getting into whiskey, when you're smelling something sort of above that 46%, up to 50%, 60%, you can really sting the sinuses. So just be careful when you're drinking. If you've got a cask strength one, add some water to it. So first of all, bring the whiskey to your nose until it's too sharp. Pull back until you just lose that little bit of sharpness, and you're getting more just the aromas, not getting so much just alcohol punch in your face. So there's a few techniques the pros use. One of them is called the dip in, dip out technique. We just dip in and dip out. Other people like to aim it more towards one nostril, because sometimes one of your nostrils might be better than the other at differentiating the flavors of the whiskey. So for me, this nostril is actually better than that one. I don't know if it's because I broke my nose when I was a kid, but I'm definitely getting more flavor of this side. So maybe that's something you could do. And tip number 3 is that you can open your mouth a little bit when you're drinking the whiskey. And what this does is it lets the vapors bypass your sinus cavity, and you can actually get a lot more flavors because it's going all the way back as opposed to closed. Yeah, you can feel it at the back. There's just that little bit more if you open your mouth. So that's something you can do if you want. It all depends. You can take this this whole video, you can take it really seriously. Majority of the time, I don't really pay attention to all these techniques, maybe a few, but then sometimes I'll be the tasting, I really want to go into it. It all depends how deep you want to go, and that's completely up to you. These are just techniques that you can take it, you can leave it, you can eat the fish, leave the bones, do whatever you want. So after you smell the whiskey, then you've got to ask yourself, what is the whiskey telling you? What does it remind you of? What flavors are you getting? And this is what whiskey notes are. But when you first get into whiskey, you're probably going to smell whiskey and you're just going to be like, alcohol. I just get alcohol. It's a bit like when you drink coffee, right? When you first drink coffee, the first time you've ever tried coffee, you'll be like, bitter. It's bitter. But then as you drink more, as you taste more different types of coffee, you realize, oh, okay, there's a bit of nutmeg and oh, a bit of cinnamon, and this one's a bit more chocolatey, and you know, same thing. You suddenly get this ability to be able to pull apart some of the flavors that are in the coffee. It's the same with whiskey. It takes a while to get past the alcohol level, as with coffee, getting past the bitterness level. You really just have to keep doing it, and you will just get better at it. It's just practice. And the other thing about tasting whiskeys, you can read it on the bottle of different whiskeys. They'll say like, you might get this flavor, you might get flowers and chocolate, but then you taste it and you're like, oh, I don't get chocolate or flowers or I don't know, leaves. I don't get that stuff. And that's because, you know, we all come from a different reference point, even just being in different countries. Like in New Zealand, I get whiskies that remind me of Feijoa, and Feijoa is not just from New Zealand, but I know in the UK, Feijoa is a hard fruit to come across. So you're not going to have that reference to go, oh, this is kind of like Feijoa. You're not going to have that. And then the same in the UK, you'd be like, oh, this is like a Jaffa cake, you know? In New Zealand, we're not going to be able to have a Jaffa cake. That's why everyone can kind of have a vastly different experience drinking the same whiskey, because we all have different experiences, and all these smells go back, you know, it's memory recall. It goes back to different moments in our life. We all got different moments. So nosing is all about the ability to program your nose. And I want to give you a whiskey hack, something really helpful to help you with nosing your whiskey, and that is a whiskey wheel. In this book here by Charles McLean, on this book called Whiskypedia, so the very first page is what he calls the whiskey wheel. And there's lots of good information, good stuff to help you, you know, differentiate your whiskey. So let's go into a whiskey wheel. So one of the great things is you'll be smelling the whiskey and be like, oh, I know there's a flavor there, but you just can't put your finger on it. You'd be like, I don't know. And what a whiskey wheel does is it can narrow it down. So the wheel kind of describes the different groups of aroma that commonly are found in whiskey. And also the descriptors in here are just a guide. As I said before, you can get different flavors, you know, you got different experience, different palate, but it might just put you in the right ballpark of, you know, what you're kind of getting. All right, so we've got the Glenallachie here. This is the Glenallachie, 46%, 12-year-old, natural colour, non-chilled filtered. And I've already poured myself a little dram here. And yeah, let's give this whiskey wheel a go. You'll start at one of these Alka Rim kind of things, grainy, grassy, fragrant, fruity, peaty, woody. But are we picking up anything that kind of is in line with any of those words on the outside rim? So I'm definitely getting fragrant, I'm getting fruity, I'm getting woody. I don't think I'm not getting any peaty notes. Might be a tiny bit of grainy. So let's go down one of those paths. The thing that stood out most to me was the fruit side. So out of fresh fruit, citrus fruit, dried fruit, and tinned fruit, I'm definitely getting fresh fruit. I'm thinking it's sort of like quite a ripe red fruit or something. So let's go down that list. So what do we got here? Fruity, fresh fruit, apple, pear, peach, melon, fresh fig, cherry, raspberry, banana, red currant. So apple, a little bit apple. Of those flavors, what's really sticking out to me is the cherry. It's and as I think of it, it's kind of like a glazed cherry. But the flavor that's kind of sticking out to me is like a plum, an overripe plum. And that one's not on this list here, but because I've been put into the ballpark, because the wheel has pushed me into thinking about fresh fruits, yeah, I'm getting plum. And then we can take it down other lists, you know, we can go down the woody. What's the woody? So vanilla, it could be vanilla, and then what was it, an ice cream vanilla, a custard, some sort of crystallized sugar, syrup. And then as you're using the whiskey wheel lots and getting to know those flavors and getting to know those tastes of a whiskey, you then will have the ability to be able to start to pull up those flavors instantly. You'll taste it, you'll be like, I know it's in a sherry cask, dried fruit, dried apricot. And this is how you grow your ability to be able to differentiate a whiskey and taste a whiskey. Just remember that there's no right or wrong answer. Just take your time and have fun. Like, it's all for fun. Okay, now let's talk about actually drinking and tasting the whiskey. So we talked about smelling, getting the flavors and stuff, and you can also use the whiskey wheel for actually tasting it. Take a sip and notice the mouthfeel. Is it kind of thick, like a cream kind of milk? Is it quite thin like water? And then also notice the journey the whiskey's going on. So when it first hits your mouth, what's it doing? The front palate. Palate just kind of means your mouth. It's another fancy word. Does it kind of sting? Is there not much happening? What happens in the middle of the palate? Are there lots of flavors coming out? Is it kind of invisible? What's happening at the back? And the back is kind of your aftertaste, which is called your finish. As you sip, swallow, and breathe back out, sort of retro-nasal feel. Sometimes you'll get different flavors coming out, but how long does it linger? So for this one, I'm still getting flavors now, so I'd say this has a long finish, whereas some whiskies will have quite a short finish. You swallow it, it's gone. And then the ratio between the front palate, the mid palate, and the back palate is called balance. Balance just means it has a good amount of all three. Does any element dominate? Oh, well, which part of it dominates? And then when you're tasting the whiskey, you gotta look at the 5 flavor profiles. So there's sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. So which ones are you getting? Different whiskies have different amounts of each. And then as you're tasting the whiskey, you can do this thing called the Kentucky chew, where you chew it, and by chewing it, it actually can bring out more of those flavors as well. So a lot more intense, a lot more flavor. Yeah, and using the chew technique makes it much easier to differentiate the different flavor profiles. So I'm definitely getting the sour, the sweet. I'm also getting a dry tannins, where it leaves a feeling of dryness in your mouth. Just a side note, you can add water to your whiskey, and I talked about this in the how to drink whiskey episode. And the thing about water is that it can actually open the whiskey up, because you know it's been sitting there for 12 years. It's a 12-year-old, and this way it kind of opens it up, like airing a wine opens up a wine. Sometimes it can change the flavor a little bit. So let's try this again. So this time I'm getting a lot more the sweetness, not so much of the bitterness. You know, it's a lot more approachable, and the tannins are gone. And with your cask strength, you want to add a lot more water. 46%, I do recommend adding a few drops. If you're going 40%, unless you're really just getting into whiskey, you probably don't need it as much, because the distiller's already added a lot of water to the whiskey. So now what I would recommend, now that you sort of know how to smell a whiskey, taste a whiskey, differentiate those flavors using the whiskey wheel, do a flight of whiskey, and get a whole bunch of different ones. Get a smoky one, get a bourbon, get a rye, get a scotch. Go through that process, and suddenly you'll be seeing how different whiskeys can be and how many different flavors you can get. You know, get some mates around, have a little flight, get them to bring their whiskey, you bring your whiskey. Good for grinding new experience, and it's all part of the journey. Hope you enjoyed this video. It's good to be back. What do you think of this new little setup? I've put it into my office. Hopefully now it will mean that whiskey episodes can now be turned around a little bit faster, and I can get more episodes out to you guys. But who knows, maybe not. I don't want to make any promises. Just let me know in the comments what you think of the set, what you think of the video. Give us a like, subscribe. Actually hit the bell button, because you know I can be a bit infrequent with these videos. So if you hit that bell, then you're just like, bam, he's got another video up. Let's learn about whiskey. So do that. But above all, share and enjoy. Beauty.